February 28th, just before midnight. Somewhere in the northern Arabian Sea, a destroyer quietly turns into the wind. On its deck, nothing looks dramatic. No explosions, no alarms. Just a row of sealed metal hatches embedded in the ship like giant steel tiles. Then, almost silently, the lids begin to open. Inside those vertical launch cells sit Tomahawk cruise missiles, each one carrying a 1,000-pound warhead, each one pre-programmed with an extremely specific destination hundreds of miles away. A few seconds later, the first missile ignites. It erupts upward in a pillar of fire, climbs vertically for a moment, then tilts forward and disappears into the darkness, heading north toward Iran. 30 seconds later, another one launches, then another and another. Within minutes, dozens of cruise missiles are racing across the Persian Gulf at just under the speed of sound. But the terrifying part is this: they are not alone. Hundreds of miles away in the eastern Mediterranean, another group of warships has already fired their own missiles. Far above them, stealth bombers are already in the air. And somewhere over the Middle East, Israeli fighters are flying one of the longest combat missions in their country's history. None of them launched at the same time, but all of them are arriving at the same time. This tactic has a name: time on target. And when it works, the enemy doesn't experience a battle. They experience a shockwave. The idea behind time on target is brutally simple. If dozens of missiles and aircraft hit at once, the defender has almost no time to react. Radar operators see everything at the same moment. Command centers become overwhelmed. Air defense systems cannot prioritize targets. And within seconds, critical infrastructure disappears. For decades, the United States military has refined this type of synchronized strike. It requires absurd levels of coordination. Ships, submarines, bombers, fighters, and satellites all operating on the same clock, mathematically choreographed. But none of that matters if the enemy's radar systems see you coming. Which brings us to the real opening move of the operation: blinding the enemy. Before the first bomb ever falls, modern warfare now begins with something invisible: electronic warfare. Hours before the missiles launched, American surveillance satellites had already begun feeding live intelligence into command centers. Signals intelligence aircraft were listening to Iranian radar transmissions. Cyber teams were probing command networks. The goal wasn't destruction. Not yet. The goal was confusion. Iran's integrated air defense system is complex. It includes Russian-supplied S-300 batteries, domestically built Bavar systems, mobile radar units, and command networks connecting everything together. On paper, it's one of the most capable defense systems in the region. But modern warfare rarely attacks systems head-on. Instead, it attacks the information. Electronic warfare aircraft began injecting false signals into Iranian radar networks. Ghost targets, fake aircraft, entire phantom squadrons appearing on radar screens. To a radar operator staring at a wall of blinking dots, it suddenly looked like multiple formations of enemy aircraft were approaching from several directions at once. Some of those signals were real, most were not, because mixed in with the electronic deception were hundreds of small devices called MALD decoys, miniature air-launched decoys. They are essentially tiny, unmanned aircraft designed to impersonate real fighters on radar. Each one can mimic the radar signature of a large jet, meaning a swarm of decoys can appear to be a massive airstrike. Iranian radar systems suddenly lit up with what looked like incoming formations of F-15S and F-16S heading toward major cities. Defenders scrambled to activate missile batteries, except the decoys weren't the real threat. They were just the noise. The real strike force was still invisible. At the same moment, radar screens were filling with fake targets. Stealth aircraft were already crossing into Iranian airspace. F-35 fighters, possibly B-2 stealth bombers. Aircraft designed specifically to operate inside heavily defended airspace. Their radar signatures are so small they can appear like birds, or sometimes nothing at all. But even stealth aircraft prefer not to fly through functioning air defense networks, which is why the next phase began: destroying the eyes of the defense. Back in the Arabian Sea, destroyers continued launching Tomahawk missiles. These weapons don't fly high like ballistic missiles. They fly low, very low. Cruise missiles hug the terrain, weaving through valleys and across deserts just above the radar horizon. That makes them extremely difficult to detect. By the time many radar stations see them, the missile is already seconds away. One by one, the missiles began reaching their targets. Radar installations, command bunkers, air defense headquarters, explosions erupted across multiple locations almost simultaneously. Entire radar arrays were reduced to burning wreckage. Communication nodes went silent. Air defense networks that depended on centralized coordination suddenly found themselves blind and disconnected. And just as the defenders were trying to understand what was happening, the sky began to fill with aircraft. From the south, carrier aircraft launched from American carrier strike groups. Ships like the USS Abraham Lincoln and USS Gerald R. Ford serve as floating air bases capable of launching dozens of fighters within minutes. Steam and electromagnetic catapults hurled jets into the air every half minute. Super Hornets armed with anti-radiation missiles headed directly towards surviving radar sites. These missiles have a particularly unpleasant specialty. They lock onto radar emissions, meaning if a radar operator turns on their system to track aircraft, the missile homes in on the signal like a shark smelling blood. For radar crews, this creates a horrifying dilemma. Turn the radar on and risk immediate destruction, or leave it off and allow enemy aircraft to fly freely. Many systems were destroyed either way. Meanwhile, stealth aircraft moved deeper into the country. Their targets were not radar systems. Their targets were strategic facilities, nuclear research complexes, missile production factories, drone manufacturing plants, command headquarters, locations that would take years to rebuild. Precision-guided bombs struck hardened structures across several cities. Some facilities were buried deep underground. Those required specialized bunker-penetrating weapons, bombs designed to punch through layers of concrete and earth before detonating. When these weapons explode underground, the shockwave travels through the structure itself, collapsing tunnels, shattering reinforced chambers, turning hardened bunkers into sealed tombs. At the same time, Israeli aircraft were approaching from the west. Israel has conducted long-range strikes before, but attacking targets deep inside Iran presents enormous logistical challenges. The distance alone is staggering. Depending on the route taken, Israeli aircraft must fly roughly 1,000 miles to reach central Iran. That means aerial refueling is mandatory. Tankers positioned across the region provide mid-air fuel transfers. Fighters connect to fuel booms while flying hundreds of miles per hour, receiving thousands of pounds of fuel before continuing the mission. But distance isn't the only complication. Airspace. Israeli aircraft must navigate routes that avoid or bypass the air defenses of neighboring countries. That requires careful diplomatic calculations and precise timing. Every minute matters, because those aircraft must arrive at their targets at exactly the same moment as the American missiles and bombers. This is the choreography of time on target. Missiles fired hours earlier, bombers flying from distant bases, fighters crossing entire regions, all converging on their targets within seconds. And when that moment arrives, the result is overwhelming. Explosions erupt across multiple cities nearly simultaneously. Industrial complexes ignite. Command centers collapse. Air defense systems vanish. The objective of this type of strike is not simply destruction. It is psychological paralysis. When everything explodes at once, defenders struggle to understand what is happening. Is this the entire attack, or just the beginning? For military planners, that uncertainty is intentional. But large nations rarely absorb blows quietly, and Iran possesses one of the largest missile arsenals in the Middle East. Ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, attack drones, weapons capable of reaching targets across the region, which means retaliation becomes inevitable. Missile launches begin within hours. Regional air bases hosting American forces become immediate targets. Facilities in the Persian Gulf activate missile defense systems, Patriot batteries, terminal high-altitude area defense systems, naval interceptors. Air defense networks light up as incoming missiles appear on radar. Some are intercepted mid-air. brilliant flashes high above cities as interceptor missiles collide with incoming warheads. Others slip through. Fragments rain down across bases and ports. Runways are damaged. Aircraft shelters struck. The skies above major cities fill with sirens and streaks of intercepting missiles. Because modern war between technologically advanced nations rarely remains contained to one battlefield, it spreads outward. Military planners call this escalation, each side attempting to impose damage while avoiding a wider catastrophe. But the strategic goals behind such strikes are rarely simple. Destroying infrastructure is one objective. Disrupting weapons programs is another. Sometimes the objective is leadership. Decapitation strikes, operations designed to remove political or military leadership in hopes of destabilizing the opposing command structure. History shows mixed results for such strategies. Sometimes leadership removal causes chaos. Other times it hardens resistance. But from a purely military perspective, targeting leadership compounds and command facilities is intended to disrupt decision-making during the most critical hours of a conflict. Because wars are often decided not only by weapons, but by how quickly leaders can organize a response. Which brings us to the strange paradox of modern warfare. Despite all the technology involved, many outcomes still hinge on human decisions. Radar operators deciding whether to activate systems, pilots deciding how low to fly, commanders deciding whether to escalate. Even the most sophisticated strike operation still depends on timing, coordination, and the hope that the enemy reacts exactly as predicted. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they don't. Military history is filled with operations that looked flawless on planning tables, only to unravel once reality intervened. Weather, mechanical failures, intelligence mistakes, human unpredictability. The chaos of war rarely follows perfect plans, but when a synchronized strike does work, it reveals something about the evolution of warfare itself. Modern militaries are no longer just armies and navies. They are networks, space-based surveillance, cyber warfare teams, electronic attack aircraft, stealth bombers, carrier strike groups, all connected through layers of intelligence and communication. The battlefield is no longer a single location. It stretches from orbiting satellites to underwater submarines, from computer networks to airfields thousands of miles away. And when those systems operate together, the effect can be devastating. A single coordinated strike can disable air defenses, destroy infrastructure, and reshape the strategic landscape of an entire region within hours. But it rarely ends the conflict, because wars rarely end with the first strike. They evolve. Retaliation leads to counter-retaliation. Regional alliances become involved. Economic pressure follows military pressure. And what began as a precise operation can expand into something far larger, which is why the most dangerous phase of any conflict is often the hours after the first explosions. Because once missiles start flying, the question isn't just who fired first. The question becomes who decides to stop. And history suggests that once the machinery of modern war is set in motion, stopping it is often far harder than starting it.